Hello. I'm going to read the second chapter of Heidi. So we're on chapter number 2, left off. It's called At the Grandfather's. So when we left off, she went to her grandfather's to stay at, remember they're in Switzerland, and she is an orphan. Her grandfather hasn't lived with anyone for a very long time, so he's not really social. And Deet, her aunt, dropped her off there so she could do a cleaning job in Frankfurt. At the grandfather's, so here's Heidi looking from behind a door. After Deet had disappeared, the uncle sat down again on the bench and blew great clouds of smoke from his pipe, while he kept his eyes fixed on the ground without saying a word. Meanwhile, Heidi was content to look about her. She discovered the goat's shed near the hut and peeped into it. It was empty. The child continued her investigation and came to the fir trees behind the hut. The wind was blowing hard, and it whistled and roared through the branches. Heidi stood still and listened. When it subsided somewhat, she went around to the other side of the hut and came back to her grandfather. She placed herself in front of him, put her hands behind her, and gazed at him. Her grandfather looked up. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to see what you have in the hut," said Heidi. "Come along, then." The grandfather got up and started toward the hut. "Bring your bundle of clothes." "I shan't want them any more," said Heidi. The old man looked sharply at the child, whose black eyes shone in expectation. "She's not lacking in intelligence," he thought. Then he said aloud, "Why won't you need them any more?" "I would rather go like the goats, with their swift little legs." "So you shall, but bring the things along," commanded the grandfather. "They can be put in the cupboard." Heidi obeyed. The old man opened the door, and Heidi followed him into the one-room hut. In it were a table and a chair. In one corner was the grandfather's bed, in another the fireplace where hung the large kettle. On the other side in the wall was a large door, which the grandfather opened. It was the cupboard. There hung his clothes, and on one shelf lay his shirts, stockings, and linen. On another were plates, cups, and glasses, and on the top shelf a loaf of bread, smoked meat, and cheese. Everything the Alm uncle owned and needed was kept in this closet. As soon as he had opened the door, Heidi came running with her bundle and pushed it in as far back as her grandfather's clothes as possible. As far back of her grandfather's clothes as possible. Then she looked carefully around the room. "Where shall I sleep, grandfather?" she asked. "Wherever you wish," he replied. This was to Heidi's liking. She looked into every nook and corner to find the best place to sleep. In the corner by her grandfather's bed stood a little ladder, which led to the hay loft. Heidi climbed this. There lay a fresh, fragrant heap of hay, and through a round window one could look far down into the valley. "I will sleep here," Heidi called down. "It is lovely. Just come and see how lovely it is here, grandfather." "I know all about it," sounded from below. "I am going to make a bed," called the child again as she ran busily to and fro in the loft. "But you must bring me a sheet, for the bed must have a sheet for me to sleep on." "Well, well," said the grandfather below. After a few moments he went to the cupboard and found a long, coarse piece of cloth, which might serve for a sheet. When he came up the ladder, Heidi had made a neat little bed in the hayloft, with the hay piled up higher at one end to form the head. "That is made very nicely," said the grandfather. "But wait a moment." He took up a big armful of hay and made the bed as thick again, in order that the hard floor might not be felt through it. "Now we'll put on the sheet." With Heidi's help, he spread the sheet over the hay, and where it was too broad or too long, Heidi quickly tucked it under. Now it appeared quite trim and neat, and Heidi stood looking at it thoughtfully. "We have forgotten one thing, grandfather," she said. "What is that?" he asked. "The coverlet. When we go to bed, we creep in between the sheet and the coverlet." "Is that so? But suppose I haven't any?" asked the old man. "Oh, then it's no matter," said Heidi soothingly. "We can take hay for a coverlet. She was about to run to the haymow again, but her grandfather stopped her. "Wait a moment," he said, and went down the ladder to his own bed. When he came back, he laid a large, heavy linen bag on the floor. "Isn't that better than hay?" he asked. Heidi pulled at the bag with all her might and main, trying to unfold it, but her little hands could not manage the heavy thing. Her grandfather helped, and when it was finally spread out on the bed, it looked very neat and comfortable. "That is a splendid coverlet," said Heidi admiringly. "The whole bed is lovely. How I wish it were night so that I could lie down in it." "I think we might have something to eat first," said the grandfather. "What do you say?" In her happiness over the bed, Heidi had forgotten everything else, but now she realized she was hungry. She had had nothing all day except a piece of bread and a cup of weak coffee early in the morning before she had begun her long journey. "Yes, I think so too," she said eagerly. "Well, let us go down," said the old man, and followed close upon the child's steps. He went to the fireplace, pushed the large kettle aside, and drew forward the little one that hung on the chain. He sat down on the three-legged wooden stool and kindled a fire. When the kettle began to boil, he put a big piece of cheese on a long iron fork. He moved it this way and that until it was a golden yellow on all sides. Heidi looked on with eagerness. Suddenly she jumped up and ran to the cupboard and kept going back and forth. When the grandfather brought the toasted cheese to the table, it was already nicely laid with the round loaf of bread, 2 plates, and 2 knives, for Heidi had noticed everything in the cupboard and knew that all would be needed for the meal. "That is right, to think of doing something yourself," said the grandfather, laying the cheese on the bread and putting the teapot on the table. "But there is still something lacking." Heidi saw how invitingly the steam came out of the pot and ran quickly to the cupboard. There was only one little bowl there, but behind it stood 2 glasses. The child came with the bowl and glasses and placed them on the table. "Very good. You know how to help yourself, but where are you going to sit?" The grandfather was sitting in the only chair. Heidi ran to the fireplace, brought back the little 3-legged stool, and sat down on it. "Well, you have a seat, only it is rather low," said the grandfather. "Even in my chair you would be too short to reach the table. But wait." He rose, filled the little bowl with milk, placed it on the chair, and pushed it close to the 3-legged stool so that Heidi had a table in front of her. The grandfather laid a large slice of bread and a piece of the golden cheese on the chair and said, "Now eat." Here's a picture of what he did. Isn't that nice? He made her a little table out of his chair. He's a nice man. He seated himself on the corner of the table and began his dinner. Heidi grasped her bowl and drank without stopping, for she was very thirsty after her long journey. Then she drew a long breath and set down the bowl. "Do you like the milk?" asked her grandfather. "I never tasted such good milk before," answered Heidi eagerly. "Then you must have some more." The grandfather filled the bowl again to the brim and placed it before her. He spread her bread with toasted cheese as soft as butter. It tasted delicious, with frequent drinks of milk. When the meal was over, the grandfather went out to the goat shed to put it in order. Heidi watched as he swept it with a broom and laid down fresh straw for the animals to sleep on. Then he went to his little shop, cut some round sticks, shaped a board, made some holes in it, put the round sticks into them, and suddenly it was a stool like his own, only much higher. Heidi was speechless with amazement. "What is this, Heidi?" he asked. "It is a stool for me, because it is so high. You made it all at once," said the astonished child. "She knows what she sees. Her eyes are in the right place," remarked the grandfather to himself. Evening was coming on. A mighty wind had sprung up and was whistling and moaning through the fir trees. It sounded so beautiful in Heidi's ears that she was delighted, and she skipped and jumped under the firs as if she were experiencing the greatest pleasure of her life. The grandfather stood in the doorway and watched the child. A shrill whistle sounded. Down from above came goat after goat, leaping like a hunting train with Peter in the midst of them. With a shout of joy, Heidi rushed in among the flock and greeted her old friends of the morning, one after the other. When they reached the hut, they all stood still, and two lovely, slender goats, one white, the other brown, left the flock to rush up to the grandfather. He stood waiting, as he did every evening, holding some salt in his hands, and they licked his fingers eagerly. Peter disappeared with the rest of his flock. "Are these both ours, grandfather?" asked Heidi, stroking first one goat and then the other, for she was delighted with the little creatures. "Will they go into the shed? Will they stay with us always?" "Yes," said the grandfather. "Now go and bring out your bowl and bread." Heidi obeyed and came back at once. The grandfather milked the goat and filled the bowl and cut off a piece of bread. "Now eat your supper," he told her, "and then go up to bed. Your Aunt Deep left a bundle for you. Your nightgowns and other things are in it. You will find it downstairs in the closet. I must attend to the goats now, so sleep well." "Good night, grandfather." "What are the goats' names, grandfather?" asked the child, running after the old man and the goats as they disappeared in the shed. "The white one is named Schwanley, little swan, and the brown one, Barley, little bear," answered the grandfather. "Good night, Schwanley. Good night, Barley," called Heidi. Then she sat down on the bench and ate her bread and drank her milk, but the strong wind almost blew her off from her seat. So she finished hastily, went in and climbed up to her bed, where she slept as soundly as a princess in a beautiful carved bed of some precious wood. Not long after, even before it was wholly dark, the grandfather also went to bed. In the night the wind blew with such force that its blasts made the whole hut tremble and every rafter creak. It howled and groaned down the chimney like voices in distress, and outside in the fir trees it raged with such fury that now and then a bough was broken off. In the middle of the night the grandfather rose and said to himself, "She may be afraid." He climbed the ladder and went to Heidi's bedside. The moon shone through the round opening and fell directly on Heidi's couch. She lay with one rosy cheek pillowed on her little round arm. She must have been dreaming happy dreams, for there was a look of contentment on her face. The grandfather gazed down at the sweetly sleeping child until the moon went behind a cloud and it was dark. Then he went back to bed. I noticed the word contentment is we call that a cognate, right? With Spanish, un cognato. Contento, si yo estoy contenta, o tú estás contento, you are contented in English, contented. It's almost the same word. It means the same thing. It means you're happy. Schwanley and barley, these words have like little dots above them. It's called an umlaut, I think, in German. And these are words. The book is set in Switzerland, so they are speaking German probably in the book, but they're not speaking it when we read it. We're reading it in English. Some of the words are going to be in German, like Schwanley and barley. I'm probably not pronouncing them exactly how they would be pronounced in German because I don't speak German, but I would like to. My grandma was German, and I'm very interested in that culture, that part of the world, especially Switzerland. It's so beautiful, as you will see. I love the descriptions of the wind, how it's rolling down the chimney like voices in distress. I love the description of the grandfather and how much he likes Heidi, and he kind of is impressed by her right away because she's so smart and such a critical thinker. Kind of like some of you are critical thinkers. I would say that one of my students, Grace, is a critical thinker, which means she's quick and she thinks for herself. She doesn't always just do what everyone else is doing. The grandfather is happy to have her there, I would say. He watched her dancing in the moonlight, and he kind of, it said he watched the child, which means he was kind of like, I could just picture him like feeling happy that he had someone there. And he made her a stool. So that shows us that he liked her, right? It wasn't really a problem for him having her there, like Deet thought it would be. People like having company, when they're not difficult people to be around, and sometimes a little girl is nice to be around, right? This concludes the second chapter. I'm going to stop it here and I'll read the third one tomorrow. Bye-bye.